I gotta be honest, this is one that might take your thoughts for a spin. We got another thread, one that's more recent. How differently do you think Nasu would have written Kiritsugu if he was the one that was in charge of Zero? We all know that the most surface level traits that Kiritsugu had in Zero are from his descriptions in Stay Night, but I still think the core of his character would have been way different than how it was in Zero, since we all know Zero is actually written by our beloved edgelord Gen Urobuchi. I like where his head is at on this one. This is dope. Prior to making this, I sat back a bit and I thought about it, and just considering the way that the story takes shape, I don't think that there was much that could change, because as he's already mentioned, the character has already been brought to us. He's already complete. So whatever would have changed had to be the in-between, and it would still have to be the same nature of things to get that same result. It will be slightly different because it's Nasu's style over his, but not like out of control different. One thing that this made me think about is the way that Urobuchi writes. The fact that they call him the Uro Butcher, because usually his writing is always surrounded by dark elements. But as we've already talked about in the best plot twist of Fate Stay Night and Zero, Nasu is very capable of writing on that level, if not worse. And I think a lot of people forget that. This is the same dude that wrote The Bad Ends, wrote Kirei and Zoken, made Kar no Kyokai with backgrounds like Fujino, made Tsukihime with backgrounds like Ciel and Noel. This is nothing new to him. The difference with Nasu is that usually he's gonna come full circle with something with a bit more solace, something good-hearted. By the very definition of the way that Kiritsugu ended, it has to have an identical path. Just think about things like the way that Saber thought about Kiritsugu and how she withheld information from Shiro for a point in time because she wasn't on the greatest terms with him. And we find that out later on through the story. That still has to happen regardless of whether Nasu writes it or Urobuchi writes it. I do wish he would have got more into context into how Kiritsugu exactly would have changed. Like what exactly would be so different for him to end up the exact same way. Maybe you take the things out that Urobuchi had Natalia do to Kiritsugu when he was young. Maybe you take out him having to take her life. Maybe you take out him having to get rid of his own father's life. But you're still gonna have to replace those things with identical situations. And anything less dramatic than what was told, I feel like wouldn't resonate nearly as strong, just simply because it wouldn't drive the point home how far this man was willing to go and how stricken his mind was ever since a young age. That's something that had to happen. That's something that we had to see. That he's been that conflicted ever since he was a child. Things like him losing his best friend Shirley at a young age and not being able to do anything about it. Would you rather that person not have been his friend in a different circumstance? Again, all these things are important. Honestly, one of the only things that probably would have changed is when Kiritsugu was blowing Maya's back out. That might have been animated because it did start as an eroge. So if Zero ended up being a visual novel also, we would have gotten those scenes. And I, for one, am good on that. You can keep that, bud. One thing that I do want to look at first is another thread that just came out because I feel like it's really relevant. This is a supposed quote from Urobuchi. I have nothing but contempt for the deceitful thing men call happiness, and find myself with no choice but to push my characters, whom I pour my heart and soul out to create, into the abyss of tragedy. Now, I was under the notion that this was a meme, but either way, there's a heavy complaint about these darker elements that come from Urobuchi, and you got people saying, no wonder he made stories like Fate Zero, Madoka Magica, and Song of Saya. I've heard great things about his other works. I haven't seen many of them other than Psycho Pass, which I also thought was good, though it's been a long time. But they make fun of the way he writes. But one thing they don't make fun of is the quality. They never say it's bad. They just say it's over the top. Like Madoka Magica, for instance. I hear tons of people talking about how great that show is. You notice what they all have in common? They're all good. Lo and behold, Mr. Edge must be doing something right. I don't understand the problem with it. Never did. It just seems like like something to complain about for the sake of doing so. So here's a rebuttal. A guy says some of his works are peak, but it's more to the point that at times he's unable to write a character that can grow and overcome their fatal flaws. And he brings up all the cast of Madoka Magica, which again, maybe you guys can speak to more than me. But dealing with the cast of Zero, phenomenal cast. Like, if we really take a step back and truly ask, is there a problem, like you say there is, with those characters not being able to overcome said flaw? Is that really an issue? I could see if the story was standalone and that's what you're leaving with. That's fine. And I think that's his main point. But even then, it's like, are you so ingrained on only seeing something end in one way that if it's not that way, then it's wrong or it's bad? Like, there's no way that people actually think like this. Like I said, I thought the way that Urobuchi writes was a breath of fresh air, because I get tired of motherfuckers walking off into the sunset like everything is happy-go-lucky all the time. And if you're a person that deals with real life shit, that's not how it goes. And you can see this in my Yusuke analysis. One main thing that I brought up about Yusuke is that he gave 110% and he still got knocked on his ass. That just happens, bro. Everything can't be perfect all the time. Now, from what I understand about Urobuchi, he goes a bit over the top because, well, everything is not perfect all of the time. But I'm just saying, he's one of a million, because for every Urobuchi story, there's gonna be 10,000 stories where everything does go right. So I'm trying to understand why you're trying to throw this one guy, this one particular guy that decides to go a different way because that's what he's skilled at, under the bus. He's really opening up the pool to a more diverse mindset. Life isn't that narrow, and it never was. And this isn't to say I just adore tragedy. I love to see a good ending when it's deserved, but a good ending, or this so-called overcoming your flaws just for the sake of doing so, even if it stunts the writing, like a character might overcome their flaw in a very inorganic way, I'm not interested in seeing that. I'm not interested in seeing something just work out for you because you wanted it to. Nah, you gotta take that, because that's how it really is. So in that vein, I feel like his writing speaks to me in that way. But we getting a little off topic. I thought that post was funny, so I just wanted to get into it. We're gonna go back into the comments of this Kiritsugu narrative. The first one, he says, I don't think the substance would be much different, but I think the style would be the same person shown under a different light. That's what I was saying. It can be different because it has to result in the same way. Of course, it's going to be different in the vein of it's being written by Nasu, but Nasu can get down like that just like Urobuchi. It's just whether or not he chooses to, and evidently, based on how that character ended, that's the course that he chose to run anyway. I do wish we could have seen that interpretation, or maybe we still can, but bro, when you talking about tragedy, Nasu can get like that. I'm not sure if the guy is saying that he wants less of it. He's got to be saying that he wants less of it, right? Because if he wanted more of it, then this wouldn't even be a topic. So this must be a complaint. And that's usually the case. The usual complaint with Urobuchi is that he's too over the top dark for no reason. But I'm telling you, man, if Nasu didn't come at the very least on the same level as Urobuchi, then it would be taking away from the story more than giving to it. Because I'm going to tell you, Fate Zero is excellent. I mean, granted, Urobuchi had an excellent foundation because Nasu already had the end in mind, the characters, and he probably already had the foundation set for him to write with. But even still, for that to not technically be his work from the ground up and to see what he did with it is amazing. I mean, he wrote that story like Fate was his and continues to do so even with the events. The next comment, I think Kiritsugu will remain the same, but Saber would change a lot. And then there's a reply. If Nasu wrote it, Saber would be written the same as in Stay Night, aka, well, still hate how they butchered Saber in Zero. Butcher her how though? And see, that's another video that I need to make, discussing the whole Saber, Stay Night, Zero butcher thing. We gotta talk about that, because again, Saber is my favorite OG heroine, and while I do feel like there are certain things that could have been more proper to her character, I don't think she was done that bad the way they gas it. Like, this is a very gassed conversation. I know exactly some of the things that they're talking about though, and I in part understand why he did some of the of the things that he did. It's just that it feels like a lot of things were very partial against her character, because Saber is in fact the deuteragonist, so she has to overcome something, the same way Kiritsugu had to overcome something. And the very root of her character is that she was unwilling to accept her flaws, even at her own demise, and that came back to bite her in the end. As a matter of fact, that's part of the problem, because again, that's another thing that's already pre-written, Saber becoming a living servant. So she had to deal with that. Like, you completely undermine the fact that Urobuchi had to write within the confines of Nasu's writing. He probably could have done more with Saber if she wasn't constricted to the idea that she has such a high level of insecurity. That has to show through her character. It has to. Maybe not to the extent that they did her, but that has to be there. And honestly, I do love the fact that she is a living servant, but if she would have just accepted her death like everybody else, and I know that's something that's completely out of her control, but if she would have just accepted her death, she probably wouldn't have went through all the things that she went through. One of the main reasons that she's mitigated in power is because she wasn't an actual heroic spirit, so she couldn't have Avalon. It would be improper for her to have Rongo and be summoned as a Lancer, because that would imply that she has nothing to deal with, no trauma to go by. She would literally just be there, being King Arthur, which is amazing, and I'm still waiting to see that. But at the same time, I love seeing these three kings sit down and have this very nuanced talk. I love seeing, having to face one of her most loyal knights of the round, her having to deal with her being paired with Kiritsugu. Now you get a taste of your own medicine. So yeah, you may be doing the right thing. You may be doing it for the betterment of mankind, but it doesn't feel good when you're trying to tell somebody to listen to how you feel and all your words and your efforts fall on deaf ears, because that's what she was doing in her life. It's like the same energy is being brought back to her in Fate Zero. Now you got Kiritsugu doing the same thing to you, and he's just doing what he wants to do, even though ironically the both of you want the same exact thing, the exact same way that many people of the round wanted the same thing. But there was so much going on that again was out of her control, stacked up on top of the fact that she distanced herself from everybody and was presenting herself in this manner. And I don't mean to derail so much into Saber, but she is Kiritsugu's right hand, that is the servant master pair, so it's just as important, because I do want to talk to you guys about what exactly do you believe is being butchered there, because a lot of the things that he did is still sound if you really take a step back. For the love of everything in the world, please don't turn Zero into a love story like the Fate route was. Please, I beg of you. I beg of you, can we just please just focus on the story? Just cause you're around a female, you don't gotta love her. You could just be around a female. Surprise! That's another thing that I've always wanted to get into on the channel. It seems like if you're around a female, you just gotta be with her. You're incapable of being around a female and y'all just being cool, or you're just being around her. That's okay. Please don't tell me that's what you wanted, cause Nasu will do that. The next one, Kiritsugu would probably be less flagellating, but more or less the same tragic character. Saber would be less of a pushover to Ryder and Gilgamesh and more secure in her ideals as a person. Her mindset will honestly be pretty similar to Kiritsugu's, the ends justify the means mentality, but more chivalrous. And that's exactly everything that I just covered. As the first official interpretation of King Arthur, I feel like it sucks that that's what it is, right? When you think King Arthur, you think like one of the greatest mythological figures to ever exist. And then you see how Saber gets done in Zero, and you're like, what the actual fuck? I get it, and that may be what they're talking about. But at the same time, if she doesn't have a wall, if she doesn't have things to overcome, then she would just be Gilgamesh. You get me? Or they would just have the perfect team. Then they would be Bazette and Ku and Stay Night if Kirei didn't trick her before it started. That's no fun for anybody. So you may not realize it, and this is why it's important to have these conversations, but you take the entire story away when you do that. The next one, not that different is what I'd like to believe. I can't imagine Kiritsugu being fundamentally different, even if Nasu wrote Zero, because the character we got was so perfect already. Again, Exactly. Also, in general, I feel people over exaggerate how different Nasu Zero would have been, since a lot of the plot points from Zero were straight up his idea. Are we reading the same story? This dude gets it. Like, do you not know Nasu can really get like that? Because the main issue here is the darkness. There's so much darkness. It's too much. Why is she so undersold? Why is there so much tragedy? Bro, do you want a story or don't you? Or do you want a love story? Because we already got that. I don't see why you want the same thing over again. Because you gotta remember, we can get any story in the world, but it's still gonna be confined to the way that Nasu writes. And we all know how Nasu writes. So let's be honest, what type of story is he gonna make? Maybe gore would have been turned down and some characters would act differently, Saber being more of a machine than a tragic knight, but for a character like Kiritsugu, I don't think he'd fundamentally change. And this goes pretty much for most of the top comments on here. Everybody's saying that he'd be the same. I do love the question though. I just wish that he went more into what he wanted in particular, because he did say our beloved Urobuchi, so it's not like he doesn't like the work. I think he just desires that angle that isn't so filled with anguish, and there's plenty of that to go around. There's a whole verse out here, bro. I don't like people taking these shots at Urobuchi because he's really one of the only writers that brings the real on that level, because everybody else is not gonna do it. They're not gonna go that far. And it's not even a bad thing. It's just people are just sensitive, man. They're just weak-hearted. They come to anime to relieve themselves and get away from their life, because that may be a tragic story, and then they sit down and get another tragic story. But sometimes that's just how it goes. Zero is an excellent story. Stay Night is an excellent story. Both of these dudes got hands no matter how you cut it. Both of them are cold with the pen to me. They get busy.